Hello, everybody. We are so grateful to all of you, whether you're returning to Big Tent or you're joining us for the first time. My name is Liz Fuller. Welcome, and I'm an advisor to Big Tent USA. At Big Tent, we're steadfast in our commitment to defending our democratic values, the Constitution, and the rule of law. Our goal is to empower you with facts and calls to action so you can become a stronger and more effective advocate for our country. So tonight we are so excited to welcome Sarah Longwell, Lis Smith, and Rachel Janfaza to Big Tent to talk about the post-2025 election and to hear their insights about what voters really do think. Now, Sarah is the publisher of the Bulwark, which she co-founded in 2019, and she's hosted the podcast, The Focus Group, now in its sixth season. The Bulwark is one of the fastest growing independent digital media companies and a home for honest pro-democracy news and analysis. Sarah is a recognized expert in qualitative research. She has hosted hundreds of focus groups and spoken with thousands of voters nationwide. Lis Smith has been hailed as a next-gen gunslinger, not your grandfather's political consultant, and the hard-charging New York operative who helped turn an obscure Indiana mayor into a national name. She is one of the most in-demand strategists in today's political environment, named to Fortune's 40 Under 40 in government and Crain's 50 Most Powerful Women in New York. So thank you for joining us, Lis. And Rachel is the founder of The Up and Up, a newsletter about young voters and a consultant on youth civic engagement and media strategy. A member of Gen Z, she is laser focused on that cohort's civic attitude and has convened listening sessions with hundreds of young people from across the country. So with that, Rachel, please kick us off and with your thoughts on post-election, particularly the youth perspective.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Big Tent, for having us. And thank you, Liz, for these introductions. I am so excited to moderate a conversation between Sarah Longwell and Lis Smith, two incredible women in politics and media. And I feel very fortunate to have the opportunity to do this tonight. So I'm going to kick us off by starting with a fun one. When both of you think about the first three words that come to mind when you think about the state of our country's politics right now, what are they?
Okay, I would say tribal, chaotic, and depressing.
So they don't have to hang together. I thought of a three-word sentence
No.
I had to get rid of any of the modifiers. So it's can't afford it. And I would use that both in terms of the way voters feel, like they can't afford anything. You're going to see affordability be the watchword going into 2026, just like it was in these most recent elections. But also, we can't afford so much of what's happening right now, morally, ethically, in terms of corruption, in terms of what's being done to the country. And so I think a lot about how we can tell a full story about how we can't afford what's happening right now.
Totally.
I like it. We have our brains work in different ways,
Yeah.
Sarah.
Mm-hmm.
I focus primarily on young voters, and I think all of the themes that are most relevant to young voters right now are hyper relevant to all voters across the age generation. And so I think both those answers seem really resonant with what I'm hearing as well. You both kind of touched on some themes that came up in the 2025 elections, and we're just 2 weeks out from those elections, which have been seen as a victory for Democrats, not just in New York City, but in Virginia and New Jersey and California too. Can you share your high-level takeaways from the elections and where you're seeing the momentum go from here?
So first things first, I think candidate quality really, really matters. And I say this after every election, but I just want to break down a few of the key instances in this one, not every single one. If you look in Virginia, Abigail Spanberger had a long record of being a very independent type of Democrat. She ran against Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama and his record when she won her first race in 2018 and flipped a Republican district. She's one of those people who very vocally and profanely criticized Democrats who promoted defund the police when she thought Joe Biden was going a little too far left. She said, we elected this guy to be normal, not to be FDR. And so it was going to be very hard for Republicans to go in and characterize her as this like left wing loon. Similarly, I would say that with Mikey Sherrill, another person who flipped a Republican district in 2018. Like Abigail Spanberger, she has a national security background. She was a helicopter pilot in the Navy. She'd been an assistant U.S. attorney. So that background makes it pretty hard to turn her into sort of a left-wing caricature. But she was also someone who showed independence. She was one of the first Democrats in the House to call on Joe Biden to resign. And so it was going to be very hard to make her seem like a caricature of just like a down the line Democrat who does what party bosses say. And like contrast that then with some of the bad candidates, right? Look at, for instance, Winsome Sears. I would love to hear what Sarah Longwell heard in focus groups about Winsome Sears, but Winsome Sears, and I'm saying this charitably, was just like a very, very weird candidate. She reminded me a lot of the Senate candidates from the 2022 cycles, when you had people like Herschel Walker, Dr. Oz, God,
Blake
who else?
Masters,
Blake
Mr.
Masters.
Unabomber guy.
Right, right, Mr. Unabomber guy. And like she presented so freaking weird. And I'm going to get to some of the issues in terms of the wrong focus she had, but like it was off-putting. I think watching her speak, you like literally felt uncomfortable. And then in New York, right, so much of the establishment ended up casting their lot behind Andrew Cuomo. And it's baffling to me. This is a 2.5-term governor who had to resign in disgrace. He had all these allegations of sexual harassment and nursing home mismanagement during COVID around him. He launched his campaign with a 17-minute announcement video. Like no one on earth is watching a 17-minute announcement video, and it showed how out of touch with political times he is. But then when he'd go out and talk about, the campaign he was running, he would talk about, well, I rebuilt LaGuardia. I did this. I probably travel more than 90% of New Yorkers. Like in my top 10 issues is not LaGuardia Airport. And oftentimes when he talked about issues, it was like he was talking about the 70s, 80s of New York. And so it's so baffling that the establishment lined up behind him. Second thing that I think is really important is candidate focus. The candidates who won were candidates who really explicitly and like almost one-notedly led with affordability. Zohran Mamdani gets a lot of credit for this, right? And he did it with a lot of pizzazz. And full disclosure, I ranked him in the primary. I voted for him in the general, and I'm optimistic but nervous about his mayoralty. But like long before that, when Abigail Spanberger announced for governor, she announced before Trump ever won before the November election 2024, her announcement video was completely focused on affordability. Similarly with Mikey Sherrill, she made her top issue, her signature thing, that she would declare a state of emergency on utility prices on day one. There's no state in the nation that has had utility prices go up more than New Jersey. And this is something that's going to hit a lot of states with AI, with data centers. And I think that sort of focus on these issues made it very hard for Republicans to say, oh, well, they're for they, them, not for you. And on the flip side, right, I mentioned some of the bad candidates. You saw Winsome Sears in Virginia focusing only on trans issues and not talking about the economy. What Trump did was successfully tie the two together by saying they're focused on this, not on this. And it's obviously a little bit tougher to do when your party controls the White House, Congress, the Senate. And similarly with Cuomo, while Mamdani was out there talking about affordability, he was talking about Israel and things like that. Not a top issue for most New Yorkers. And the third thing, and I'll be quick here, is Trump. How you talk about Trump. You cannot just go out and do what Trump likes to talk about a lot, which is Trump derangement syndrome, and just freak out over everything he says, run down every rabbit hole, take every piece of bait he throws our way. There's a lot of bait there. What Abigail Spanberger and Mikey Sherrill did was an exercise in restraint. When Abigail Spanberger talked about Trump, it wasn't about he's a racist, misogynist, this, that, Gulf of America, Gulf of Mexico, whatever. It was he is killing jobs in Northern Virginia with Doge and with all these federal layoffs, and that's bad for our state. With Mikey Sherrill at the end, she closed on how he was canceling, the Gateway Tunnel, the big infrastructure project up here that is really, really important to the Northern New Jersey, New York region. And by doing that, I think they signaled to people who sometimes think Democrats are just all about Trump and like have Trump derangement syndrome that no, they were focused on you, your pocketbooks, your quality of life, and how Trump was affecting that, and less just on the show of Donald Trump.
Sarah, I would love to get your take on the election as well, but also looking at from your perspective in the focus groups that you were having with voters leading up to the election and in the aftermath, what seems to be resonating?
Yeah, that was a really good, thorough unpacking, and I co-sign most of it. But I want to just add a couple things that they had in common, these three candidates. One, they were all young, right? They were all like next-gen candidates running against people, to Liz's point about Cuomo, who just seemed kind of like, this has passed you by,
Yes,
Like,
yesterday's news.
yeah.
Yesterday's news. Yeah.
And so they felt fresh. They felt, like, a slightly newer thing, right? And so I think that was good. The other thing is, and I really like that you ended up with these folks together, because I think what it did was kind of force Democrats to understand what a big tent's going to look like for them. And that means, like, I got to tell you, Mamdani, not for me. Not for me. I was a Republican, 8 years ago. And frankly, one of the things that made it much easier for me to start sort of shifting into an active place of supporting Democrats was the class of 2018 that Democrats put forward. It was Abigail Spanberger. It was Mikey Sherrill. It was Alyssa Slotkin. And for me, I'm looking at like, oh, these are CIA agents, helicopter pilots. Like, I can rock with this. And so I think that the fact that you had people who people think of as moderates with somebody that they think of as kind of a radical who had a broad swath of positions across things like Israel, some of the wedgier issues, you could see like, no, let's figure out how they can all exist in the same party. And I think that that's going to be an important lesson for Democrats to learn going forward, both how you run people. Mamdani's not a good candidate for governor of Virginia, but he was a good candidate for people who are really feeling the affordability issue there in New York. And he ran a different kind of next-gen campaign. And I'll just say that while from a policy standpoint, I would disagree with a great deal that Mamdani is putting out there. And I don't think many of his plans are particularly workable. I do think that having somebody running a strong, like, I'm sitting down with people, I'm listening to them, like the way that people want to feel listened to right now is deep. And so he did that. And then he showed everybody. He had a great social media campaign, but it wasn't just like, ooh, he makes viral videos, the way people said. Like, he was incredibly disciplined about what he was talking about and how he was showing people he was going to do it. Then the third thing, and I want this to really land because this is going to matter a lot going into 2026. Why did these guys blow people out? So if you start teasing out the different races, especially in the New Jersey and Virginia race, although I also want to add in there Pennsylvania, where they kept the Supreme Court. They could have lost a couple of Supreme Court seats. That was actually a huge win for democracy going into 2028, having that Supreme Court there in Pennsylvania. Very important. They won a couple of races in Georgia. Part of the reason that they're doing that, though, is because the makeup of midterm elections are different than the makeup of general elections. And this is something that has changed about our politics in a real way. Sometimes people think, oh, well, if we just turn out more low propensity voters, we could have beaten Trump. No. Trump would have won by more if there had been more low propensity voters. However, because there's been a trade. The parties have been trading voters. Congrats to the Democrats. You got people like me. You got people who had probably voted for McCain, maybe voted for Romney and said, Trump, absolutely not. No way, never. Biden, sure. Harris, sure. Like, you get us. Here's the thing. Trump, though, got a bunch of people who don't pay attention, working class voters, people without a college degree. And the average voter in this country is a 50-year-old white person without a college degree. Okay, so Trump was able to add more of those people to his coalition. Bad news in a big general election with extremely high turnout. When I saw the turnout numbers in 2024, I was like, it's no good. In an off-year election, the new voters that have come into the Democratic Party and the makeup of the Democratic Party being a highly educated, highly engaged cohort, they turn out for off-year elections at a much higher proportion than a bunch of the dude bros who were listening to Theo Vaughn turn out in a general election. And so going into 2026, I think this is a place where Democrats have an actual structural advantage in the voting makeup. And I think we saw that previewed in these races, which is important to think about for 2026.
Totally. And I'll just add that I did a listening session with a group of young voters in New York City right before the mayoral race. And Sarah, you mentioned the idea of listening. One of the biggest things that they said worked to Mamdani's advantage, and they were pretty much all Mamdani supporters, was that his social media content, which was so well done, actually showed him in real life engaging with New York City voters on the street, walking through Brooklyn, talking to real constituents. And that was something they really appreciated. And Liz and Sarah, you both talked about the generational divide and the idea that Cuomo was very much, he was a former governor, son of a former governor. And I had a 22-year-old young woman tell me that while Andrew Cuomo represented the status quo in the past, Zohran Mamdani was the face of the future. And so that was people felt that very deeply. And I think that really mattered. We kind of already touched on this with what you're talking about in building a big tent, but I'm really curious, we had these very different candidates running certainly there's similarities between Maggie Sherrill and Abigail Spanberger, but they're very different from Zohran Mamdani, and what works in New York City does not work in, let's say, Michigan in 2026. So from your perspectives, both and Sarah, I want to start with you from the voter perspective, and then we'll go to Liz from more the candidate side of things. What do you think, Sarah, voters are looking for when they're looking to candidates who represent their specific community? And then Liz, how do you believe that message can be localized depending on who the candidate is in the specific race or region that they're living?
Yeah, so I want to, this issue of affordability, right? I could see the way Democrats do things, them being like, okay, I understand things are too expensive for voters. I'm going to talk about affordability. But I would like to inject, I believe in you, Democrats. I believe that you can make more than one argument at once. And in fact, understand how to tell a bigger story, right? This is something Trump is very good at, taking an issue. Immigration, for example, is an issue that is, for Trump, he collapsed the space between crime, between terrorism, between economic anxiety. These people are taking your jobs. They're getting things you're supposed to get. He makes it about crime. They're bringing, and drugs. You ask, why do people in the Midwest care about it? Well, fentanyl. Now, you can try to explain that that's not how this is not how fentanyl is coming into the country, but it doesn't matter. When he collapsed it and told a whole story. Well, when you tell a story of affordability and you use, why is Trump building a gilded ballroom? Why is he giving tax cuts to his rich friends? Why is he protecting a pedophile ring of rich people and elites? You can make it a full story about your grocery prices are going up. Your health care is less affordable while he's building gold-plated ballrooms and protecting pedophiles, all for his rich friends, right? So I think that when I listen to voters, and I'll just tell you about Democratic voters, they're so mad. They're so angry. I'll do these focus groups where I'll ask people, because there's the whole debate going. Should they be more moderate? Should they be more progressive? Now, you might think, Sarah, you're a former Republican. You want them to be more moderate, right? Don't you think they should be more moderate? No, I think everybody should be more aggressive. It's not about moderate and progressive, it's about being more aggressive. It's about meeting your constituents where they are and showing people that you, like a human, care about their lives. This is why Mamdani was effective. I genuinely care about your lives. And one of the things that happens to people in Washington, it's why people hate people in Washington, is you get really comfy. It's hard to find the urgency to go fight for people when you yourself are in a very comfortable position and you're not under threat like them. Show them you feel the sense of urgency that they feel. And I think that if people can do that, because it's not just resist. Resist is 2018. Okay. That's not where we are. It is, though, We want the country to go in a different direction, and I can tell you what that direction is. That people are like, well, we can't just say what we're against, we have to say what we're for. True, but like, put some meat on the bones. What are you for? I mean, I ask Democrats, why are you a Democrat? Well, I mean, like, and mostly where you finally get to is people saying, like, well, I want to help people, or like, I think we should be better than this. And, you know, and I think Democrats are going to have to give people some, put a little more meat on those bones and say, here's what we're going to do. Okay. We're going to hire 1 million new nurses. We're going to hire 1 million new social workers. If Donald Trump can hire a gajillion ICE agents, right? This is about priorities. Our priorities lie with getting good jobs for people that help you, that take care of you when you're sick, that are going to take care of your aging parents. Go out there and tell a story. Martin Luther King, when he gave an I Have a Dream speech, didn't just say, let's dream. He told you what the dream was.
Yep.
Right. And so that, I think, is what people are really hungry for.
Liz, on the candidate side, how do you think they should be messaging this?
Well, first of all, let me just say, after listening to that from Sarah, I want to run through a wall. I mean, she really, really nailed it. And, you know, before I get into the candidate side of it, I really just want to punctuate what she said is voters want elected officials, candidates to feel what they feel. And I think that's part of the problem that Democrats had in 2024. And Sarah is like the queen of focus groups. I've listened to a lot of focus groups. I've seen a lot of ethnographies. And the number one thing that people feel like about Democrats is that we don't listen to them. We don't care about them. We look down on them. I remember there's this one thing I heard from a focus group that like just haunted me, that it's like Democrats seem like the people who laugh at you for shopping at Walmart. And like the main thing that they kept saying was that like they're telling us that democracy is existential, that abortion rights are existential, that LGBTQ rights are existential, that climate is existential. Don't get me wrong, all of those things are existential in their own ways, but to most people, what's existential is, can I wake up and like feed my family? Can I pay my bills? Can I pay my mortgage? Well, even if I have a mortgage, can I pay my rent? And we do not, or we were not back then addressing that. We were instead telling people, no, what you should care about is democracy, the rule of law, this, that. And we got to stop doing that. And to Sarah's point, we got to meet voters where they are. But in terms of like how we, to your question, I think it's really important that we understand that there is no, if we want to win, we want to build a majority, we want to build a durable majority, that there is no one way to be a Democrat. And you, Rachel, know I'm involved with a group called Majority Democrats. And it's a group of 32 elected officials at every level across the country. And we're working on recruiting, you know, candidates across the country to run. And you know what? It's different from other groups because it doesn't have a litmus test. It's not, you have to check every single box to be in the club. It's, do you know how to talk to people? Do you know how to win? Can you overperform? And will you stand up to the establishment and status quo that has brought us to where we are? And if we want to be a majority party, we need to look to some of these House candidates who are running in places like South Texas. I talk about Bobby Polito a lot. I don't know, Sarah, tell me if you know about any of these guys. He is a Tejano music star. He's the George Strait of Tejano music. And you know how he's running? He's running as a personally pro-life Democrat who will protect a woman's right to choose, but is also not for an assault weapons ban. He thinks that some of the rhetoric on, the border and police from Democrats have gone too far. I look at candidates like Jamie Ager in North Carolina, like Bob Brooks in Pennsylvania. They're also not going to be there with Democrats on all of the climate and gun control issues. But that's okay, because you know what? A Democrat in those areas who can win, who agrees with us on 7 out of 10 issues, is a hell of a lot better than a Republican who agrees with us on 0 out of 10 issues. And we've got to sort of drop the purity test. The perfect is the enemy of the good, sort of, and understand that the perfect is the enemy of the good. So there's no like national message that I see for Democrats. I do think that we need an overwhelming sense that economic pain is what is fueling a lot of voters. more so than, this issue or that issue, and it's all going to be local. But we need to give people the space to be a Democrat who looks like their community, sounds like their community, meets voters in their communities where they are, and sometimes breaks with progressive orthodoxy. And if you look at the Democrats who overperformed most in 2024, people like Pat Ryan, Angie Craig, Pat Ryan in upstate New York, Angie Craig in Minnesota, Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez in Washington State, Jared Golden in Maine. You know what all of them did? While they're going out and talking about affordability, which is important, they all went out and, criticized Biden for letting the border get out of control. And we need to give Democratic candidates that sort of space to run with if we are going to build a majority party.
That makes so much sense. And this idea that I know one of the words you use to describe our state of politics is tribal, but the reality is that most people don't fully feel like they're a part of one box or the other. There's a lot of overlapping, and they might have some ideas that are part of this party's platform and some ideas that are part of the other. And so I think giving them space to actually be able to see candidates who reflect where they're coming from and may not agree with every single sort of talking point is really important. They don't want to feel gaslit either, that pretending like these issues don't exist. They want to be told, and have the issues addressed head on, and then offering ideas for solutions, not just saying like, we need to talk about the issues. Liz, I know that you are going to have to hop off in just a minute, but I want to ask you one more question before you go. About gerontocracy and this idea of next generation leadership, which I know is a big focus at majority Democrats. Obviously, New York just elected a 34-year-old mayor with resounding support, but there is a debate happening within the party right now. And I don't think that age always matters. I know Senator Markey has this line that it's the age of your ideas. And I think there's some merit to that, given that we see young people supporting people like Bernie Sanders. And there's obviously ways for older candidates to get support from young people. It doesn't just have to be young elected officials. But when you're talking about the biggest issues that the country, from at least where I think it stands, is facing today, when you think about AI and you think about unaffordable rent and tricky job market, all of these things, even social media and how to use it and how to regulate it, are easier to come up with solutions for if you actually understand and have lived through the experience of what it means to deal with these struggles. So I'm curious, when you think about your strategy with these next gen candidates you're working with, is that a focus where you're looking at people who have actually been through the problems that voters are facing? And if so, how do you think about those generational divides?
Absolutely. And I mean, let's look at the bigger issue. And I think, Sarah, feel free to disagree with me on this, but when I look at focus groups and even in deep blue areas and swing areas, Democrats say, oh my God, Democrats of all ages, especially the older Democrats, say, oh my God, we need to get rid of the gerontocracy. The gerontocracy is killing us. And it's not just killing us, to your point, because people are, old. And I think that it is good to have people with wisdom in office, but it is killing us when we have a 87-year-old president who, the reality is, when was the last time he had to buy a house? When was the last time he had to, apply for childcare and look at those bills? When is the last time that he had to, deal with a lot of the costs that people like me, I wouldn't say I'm particularly young. I just turned 43, but I have a 2-year-old, and I understand costs on a very visceral level in a way that someone like him or Chuck Schumer doesn't. And I think that I hate the term lived experience. I think it's one of those woo-woo terms that people use, and it always turns me off. But there is something to the lived experience of people who are growing up in this time, and they're seeing, groceries be super expensive. That, forget buying a house, it's just like affording your rent, healthcare going up, childcare, even if you're considering sending your kid to private school, how high those costs are, and you really feel it, understand it viscerally, and it's like you can't pay off your credit card bills. I don't think Ed Markey, Joe Biden, Chuck Schumer understand any of those things. And I also don't think that they're like, and that's a part of the issue with and Andrew Cuomo, right? I don't think he was on public transit anytime recently. I don't think he understands all the upgrades that we need to it. And so the lived experience that younger candidates have, I think is really important because they can speak to it. But they understand all these insane societal changes that are happening that almost make even people like me feel powerless, right? When we see what social media is doing to our kids, when we see industries, for maybe for me, for colleagues of mine, for friends of mine, potentially being wiped out by AI. They don't understand it. They don't even know how to post a tweet, go on Facebook, open a PDF, and these are the guys who are going to supposed to be taking on the all these new technological frontiers. And so, yes, I do think it's a case by case basis, and we shouldn't just have a blanket rule that after a certain age, like some law firms have, that you're out. But I also think that it is, frankly, unwise and immoral for Chuck Schumer to be going out in a state like Maine and recruiting a first-time Senate candidate who'll be sworn in at the age of 79 for a variety of reasons. And we should be looking to younger candidates, not just because of their youth, but people with the right perspective. And more importantly, we need to be looking to candidates who haven't spent their entire lives in politics, who aren't lawyer lobbyists, who didn't go to college and say, I'm going to run and be a state rep. You know what people are responding to more now, and why people are sort of confused by the Graham Plattner phenomenon, how he keeps getting hit by things and succeeding, is that they want people who haven't been steeped in politics, people who understand some of those struggles, who are maybe a little bit flawed. And I'm not even saying this as a Graham Plattner person. And we need to seek out people who have lived real lives and struggled like real people. And going back to what Sarah said, like felt their pain in real ways, not just by like sitting in Washington and voting on bills and going to the same parties over and over again and being completely insulated from those things. But man, people, Democrats especially, are really pissed off about the gerontocracy. They think we pulled a fast one on them in 2024 with Joe Biden. And I don't know, maybe we should listen. And I don't think there's any movement in my lifetime that has ever, in American history, that has ever been worse off by injecting a little new blood and new energy.
Well, thank you so much, Liz. I know you have to go. Sarah and I will keep chatting. And I think Liz Fuller will come back on, but we really appreciate you being here, Liz. Thank you.
Great.
Liz?
Thank you. It was so fun talking with you guys.
We've got a ton of questions that because you guys have obviously stimulated people a lot. A question for both of you. The first that pops up, it's sort of an amalgam of several questions. What are you seeing as the shift in MAGA world post-election and post the Epstein files release, assuming that comes to pass?
Yeah, I mean, look, on Epstein in particular, I have been a big fan of, and from the jump when the Epstein stuff started to happen, I was like, press on this. And I don't think everybody wanted to, because they're like, no, but we really got to focus on affordability. And like I already said, I think there are ways to tie these issues together. Here's the thing, though, you got to sort of separate the MAGA faithful, who are responding to Epstein sort of somewhere between like your friend who cancels plans at the last minute. Like, they're aggravated by it. They're annoyed. Some of them are frustrated, but they're not like gonna stop being friends with Donald Trump forever, right? They're not like throwing him out over this. I do think, though, again, if you put it together in a larger context of corruption and of doing favors for rich friends, like, you should press on it. It is important. And also, it is clearly freaking him out so much, and it does put them on their heels. They're sort of between, oh, we're supposed to be so transparent. It also highlights the incompetence and corruption of the Trump administration by Bondi, Kash Patel. And so I think that it is important to press on Epstein and not feel like, well, it's not a kitchen table issue, so we shouldn't talk about it. Yes, you should. The independents that swung for Trump, most of them did it because they saw him as a businessman. They thought Joe Biden was too old, and it was an affordability. It was like, who's going to improve my life? And I just think like it's a really easy one, actually. Like, sometimes politics is really hard, but this one's easy. You just need Democrats who are young, vigorous, and are going to show up and say, like, I'm going to try and improve your lives. And these guys have lied to you. And I think you can you're already seeing the collapse with Hispanic voters. Republicans thought they had captured the Hispanic vote. They were a new part of the MAGA coalition that were going to be durable. They are not. They are immediately back up. They are Latino voters extraordinarily swingy. Young voters who are just dealing with big affordability issues. And like, because Trump has been part of their political experience their entire lives, they don't see him as anathema to like everything politics has always been. So lots of them swung toward him. These are not durable parts of the MAGA coalition. They are people who can swing away very quickly. And so I want people to remember that swing voters exist and not think we're so hopelessly polarized, to understand that affordability and age and a sense of weakness around Biden was a big part of what happened in 2024. And I think that Democrats can have a really strong 2028, because there's something else in here. We talk about the MAGA coalition. There is a reason that Republicans flirt with the Trump 2028 stuff. And it's because they honestly don't know how to hold their coalition together without Trump. Trump is a glue for a very fractious coalition that exists under him now. And what we are seeing in this moment, and we may talk a little bit more about Marjorie Taylor Greene and whatnot, what we're seeing is the very beginning of people positioning themselves for power in a post-Trump world. And I think that this is one thing I know from voters. A whole bunch of people who had never voted before turned out to vote just for Donald Trump. And Donald Trump has taught them to really hate the Democratic Party, but also to hate the Republican Party. Like, they are Trump-only voters. And so what happens in a post-Trump world, I think we start to go from all the things that have happened, the ways in which Trump scrambled things, to a new level of opportunity to bring people back if Democrats can just get their shit together. Excuse me.
Totally. I think along those lines, what I'm seeing from some of the younger MAGA voters who were born into Trump's Republican Party, like they did not know, to Sarah's point, a politics without Trump. The first election Gen Z could vote was 2016. But they're not loyal to the Republican Party. They voted for Trump. And I think there are certain things that have happened in the past many months, mainly the fact that the cost of living hasn't changed. In fact, it's actually gotten more expensive, that have really pissed them off because Trump promised to bring down the price of everything. Simultaneously, there is this brewing sort of America First movement that is very strong. I think this started to bubble up. At least I started hearing it in my listening sessions and interviews during the Russia-Ukraine war, when that was first starting, where young men in particular were very frustrated that they felt like American dollars were going to foreign interests and foreign wars when there were domestic problems and their life was hard to afford here at home. And they were really frustrated by that. Then you had Israel's war with Hamas, and they started to get frustrated that, again, they felt like their taxpaying dollars were going to foreign wars rather than problems that were here in the United States. And so we see that certainly there are creators and podcasters and activists who are riddled with anti-Semitism, and that plays into the way that they are conceiving of all of this as well. But at the same time, I think it comes down to this idea that elected officials are not working in the interest of the American people. Instead, they're working for others. You put Epstein files on top of that, and it creates this aura of that Trump is a part of this network of the elite and not for the everyday person. And it has started to really, really frustrate a core part of his 2024 constituency that is not necessarily a part of the Republican constituency writ large. And so I'm seeing that friction really bubbling up, especially over the past couple of weeks. And I think just to kind of, bring it to the 2025 elections as well. Like, these are not loyal Democratic or Republican voters. And Zohran Mamdani in New York City ran a campaign that attracted so many new voters. The youth voter turnout in the off-year election year was way higher than it has been in the past. And so, similar to how Sarah said Trump was able to turn out new voters as part of his coalition in the past, a candidate like Mamdani did that in New York City as well. And there were similarities in the way that they ran their campaigns. They went on every show. They were eager to show up. They were charismatic. They had bold ideas, even if you don't agree with them. And that type of energy of someone who's actually for the people rather than for the special interest of some specific group is really what I'm hearing when you're looking at those young men in particular as the needed necessity to have as part of that campaign.
I'm sorry, but I just saw a question in the chat that just said, Sarah, the candidate in 2024 was Kamala, not Joe. And I want to answer that actually, because it's a really important point. If Kamala had thrown Joe Biden under the bus and said, I'm going to do things super differently, I'm not, Democrats, it's a lesson for everybody. You have to break from the past. Like there's a way in which people have to sort of say like, no, I'm here for something brand new. And when she said that she wouldn't do anything differently than him, everyone heard that. Everyone heard it. And I often say there's people who are like, well, America just won't vote for a black woman. And I'm like, guys, Trump really beat an old white man. I promise you the person he beat was the old white man whose record people were deeply frustrated with. And her 107 days was not enough to overcome that. Although I'll throw out one other thing that I think is really important, and it goes to the gerontocracy point a little bit. Voters now have different relationships with candidates than they used to, in that everybody's on their phone all the time, looking at TikTok. Rachel can correct me if I'm wrong about the young people, but like I'm 45 and I'm on social media all the time too. You're used to people talking to your face now constantly, and you feel like you know them. And the thing I heard in the aftermath of the 2024 election was that people didn't feel like they knew who Kamala Harris was. And Donald Trump, because of The Apprentice, and then because of the way that he did social media, I hear people say it all the time. They're like, well, I know him. And people will always choose the devil they know over the devil that they don't. And that feeling of knowing someone is so important, which is why when I talk about communication strategies, it involves younger people who now know how to comfortably sit and talk to somebody on a 3-hour podcast, which is not how regular politicians are built. And so politicians are actually going to have to unlearn some of their politician-y behavior, because voters now can smell and see, because they're used to people, when someone's BSing them, when somebody's not telling them what they actually think. Kamala sat with my buddy Tim Miller, one of my co-hosts on the Bulwark last night, and he was trying to get her to, it was like, but Biden kind of screwed you, right? Like and she kept kind of dodging it. And I guarantee you that if Kamala Harris was backstage with one of her good friends and they were out talking about Biden, she would be like, she would have a lot of things to say. And voters can smell that gap. They just can.
Sarah, who do you think it would be, going back to your idea about packaging a message, of putting side by side the incredible corruption that is going on, plus the pain that people are suffering, the economic pain, and melding those together in one message? Who do you think is handling that messaging well?
Oh, who's doing it well is such a hard question, because there aren't that many people who are doing it quite the way that I wish they were. And it's funny because this is my honest answer. It is actually tough because you sort of need the energy of someone who wants to jump in front of every camera, a la Gavin Newsom. They also have to seem like not a super regular politician, right? Like Gavin Newsom looks like he was built in a lab to run for president at some point. And voters are sort of like, they might be like, okay. And they like that he's beaten up on Trump on social media. Like he's definitely getting momentum from that. But I think that you've got to find somebody who is a natural storyteller and who has an everything, everywhere, all at once ability, right? That's a movie I didn't like. It's a communication strategy I'm begging people to take on. And so I don't see that many people right now out there doing the storytelling, doing the narrative architecture of being able to say, so I've seen some Pritzker, some Melissa Slotkin. I do think Pritzker's been pretty good. I do think Newsom, for as much as he's not for me, really, I think he's been pretty good. I think Alyssa Slotkin is good. Like there's people who are good, but how much do you see them? Because I will tell you, one of Trump's geniuses, and I use that term advisedly because it's more like lizard brain and like him being steeped in media all his life, is the power of repetition, reps, same thing over and over again. And so part of what I want, again, it goes to the sense of like, if you had this level of urgency, if you thought democracy was on the rails at stake, you find in every camera you can find to sit down and explain to people, look how corrupt he is. Look, your grocery prices aren't going down, and what, he's going to protect a pedophile ring? And I need that not from one Democrat. I don't need it from 3 Democrats. I need it from 250 Democrats. I need them everywhere. Trump practices dominance narratives that allows him to set the conversation. Democrats need to change the conversation and go on offense, so they're the ones setting the pace. And so for me, a lot of it is just about this like volume and urgency. Anyway, that's and then being the storytelling and bringing it together.
There's a saying, you're only as good as your last haircut. Well, you're also only as good as your last social post or your last podcast interview or the last hit that you did. And I think that, especially when you're talking about younger Americans, they're really used to seeing the people that they interact with on social media posting literally all the time. And I think that politicians have this like very, I mean, traditional politicians at least have this very like canned way in which they post, where it has to be approved by so many different people and go through all of these hoops to get it across. And that doesn't work. And Sarah was also talking about, you need to feel like the people. The word of the year, I don't know exactly who decided this.
Parasocial.
Parasocial, exactly.
Yeah.
The word of the year is parasocial. People want to have a relationship with the public figures in their life, whether that is a good thing or a bad thing, jury's out. But it's what they're asking for. And so you need to be everywhere, to Sarah's point. But you also, I think that there's this worry that, if I posted something bad, I can't do it again, because what if I make the same mistake? No, actually, that's the opposite. And Trump is the king of this. He'll post something that's completely outlandish and then post something even more so 5 minutes later, so that you don't remember the thing that happened, he said, the first time. And more candidates need to adopt that approach. But also that means that more candidates have to actually understand how to post on social media and have to actually be users of the platforms which they are posting on and which they are messaging through. Because if they're not natural to the actual platform, they don't understand the algorithm, they're not going to be able to successfully master it.
There are a lot of questions about deportations and how people are reacting to that. And I'm wondering, as the parent of a Gen Zer, I'm wondering, I know how horrified my kid is with the deportation strategy. What, from your perspective, is the way Gen Zers are reacting to that?
Gen Zers in particular, I think this is a really important question. And I think I've seen the reactions to this happening hyper locally, where ICE raids are taking place. So, for example, over the summer, I saw a lot of concern from young people in California when in Los Angeles, this was a massive issue that was happening there. So I think that it's kind of like any issue, it feels local. And that's when people are most tuned into it and most compelled to take action against it. If it hasn't happened in a community where a young person lives, I haven't really seen them focusing on it just as much as the others in the spaces where it has happened. That said, we know that everyone's watching other people's lives unfold through social media in real time. And so I think that when they see a video where it's very disturbing, I think that can have some of the same effect. But I will say that I think it is hyper local, and it really is affecting people in the communities that are feeling the most affected by these raids and these deportations. And I think immigration is seen as an issue and a concern, and the response to it in some of my listening sessions, but I have to say it has not come up as the top issue in my conversations writ large. Again, it really has depended on where the people are from and if it's been something in their community.
Okay, thank you. I have so many questions to get to, but I'm going to have to just say one last question for each of you. What keeps you up at night? And what's one thing that you would tell people to get them motivated?
Yeah, I'll tell you what keeps me up at night. And it's actually not something we've talked about really at all. And it is the fact that Donald Trump's allies, Larry Ellison buying CBS, obviously there was Barry Weiss, putting her in charge of that. But then now he's going to go try to buy Warner Brothers. You've got Zuckerberg obviously owns Meta and therefore Instagram. You've got Elon Musk. Everybody kind of made fun of him because he overpaid for X. The amount of influence it bought him. And I think that what frustrates me is that Democrats don't have the sense of urgency around either buying and or building new media ecosystems that reflect today the way that people are communicating. Like they are seizing the means of communication now. Like they own it. Trump and his allies are owning it. And that is how people are going to be reached. And so I just really want people like go get all your rich friends to buy CNN before Ellison does. Like things like that, I think are really important. If I could go back to the immigration thing for 1 second, which is voters heard Trump say he was going to deport criminals and they liked that idea. People heard Trump that he was going to close the border. They like that idea. Those two things are broadly popular. And I'll tell you why. People cannot access the compassion. Swing voters, even many Republican voters and Trump voters, they want people to be able to come here legally. But they want people, and this is their words, they say, want people to come here the right way. And right, they don't like the chaos of people pouring over the border. And so Democrats are going to have to figure out how to both say that you can secure the border and offer the American dream for people who want to come here and be Americans and help us do the thing here and make it a patriotic pitch. And I think that there is a way to redo the whole conversation around immigration that includes, hey, we built this shadow economy that relies on people, and we should find ways to bring them out of the shadows so that they're paying taxes and we know who's here, but that they have jobs and that it puts them on a path to citizenship. And like Democrats are just going to, they had decided for some reason they were just going to not talk about immigration, and they got to stop that, because even if it's not, it is a dominant issue for a lot of Americans for the reason I said earlier, which is it tags into sort of fears, a lot of fear around safety and terrorism and drugs and crime. And so you have to sort of give them I'll secure the border. We do not want criminals here, while also then pointing to Trump's excesses, his inhumane and frankly incompetent, just sending people to foreign gulags. They're pulling Americans off the streets. They're going into schools and taking people's parents. Like you can point to the excesses if you kind of give people the basics of what they need on this.
Thanks. And from you, Rachel, what's keeping you up at night?
I have two points that I'll make on this. One, Sarah and I talked about this on her focus group podcast a couple weeks ago, is the gender gap. I think the way that young women and young men have drastically different life priorities and visions of success is a problem, and they are talking past each other, not to each other. That is a top concern. But the other thing, I think as a country, we kind of skirted past this very quickly, but Charlie Kirk was shot and killed, and a lot of young people were really upset about that. I had young women as far left as they coming to me and saying, this is the worst thing that's ever happened. Where do we go from here? And I don't think that we sat with that. I don't think that enough schools are addressing political violence in this country. I don't think that people are willing to talk about it enough because it's really scary. But I know that young people are really hungry for solutions and to not grow up in a world where this becomes the norm or where people become numb to it. And so I also hope that this gives a little bit of hope to everyone listening that there's an appetite for a politics that doesn't look like this anymore. I know it because this is what young people I'm in constant touch with are telling me every day. And so I'm really looking for ways to create opportunities for young people to come together and create dialogue where they're actually talking about where they disagree, because I think education has failed us in a lot of respect. There's no civic education, and most colleges are afraid to touch these topics. So I really hope that we can have more spaces for that dialogue so that this doesn't become something that is normalized.
Okay. Sadly, we have just so much to get to when I can't do it. Please tell us from each of your perspectives, how do we motivate folks to fight back in 2026?
I mean, it has been throughout this conversation, right? It's great candidates that fit their place, sort of fit the place they're running. I do think people should go hard on Trump. I mean, I think that is telling the story about the way, because it's not just about, you're not trying to beat Trump in an election. You're trying to beat his ideas and the entire party, like the toxic forces he's unleashed on our country. And so people being able to sort of talk about the things that Donald Trump has offered as he is increasingly unpopular and saying they are failed. He lied to you. He lied to you about lowering your grocery prices. Like, speak plainly about the ways in which he has hurt America, not democracy, America. And I do think that is going to motivate people in 2026, but also oversight. I do think that it's going to matter. Like, if you want any power for change, you need Democrats to take back control of one of the houses. and you nationalize the ability to have oversight over Trump, people are going to care about that.
I think we need to listen. I think that people feel empowered when they feel that they're a part of the process, especially when it comes to young people. They want agency and autonomy. And the reason why many feel disenfranchised or disillusioned is because it feels like people aren't taking their concerns seriously and aren't willing to actually sit down and have a conversation with them. And so the way to motivate them, I believe, is by uplifting their concerns, allowing them to have a seat at the table, and then actually working with them to create solutions. And this is what Zohran Mamdani did, and it was successful and it was really motivating, and we saw high turnout. So I think it really starts with listening.
Thank you both so much. You've given us all so much to think about, and your fingers are both clearly on the pulse of the electorate. And you've given us some. You're inspiring. You really are. Thank you.
Yeah, Rachel's good, right?
Both
I love
of you.
Sarah.
Both of you are great. Bye. Good night.
Thank you.